Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with producer Fiona Kinsella and writer-director Keith Farrell about their powerful T.G. Ceathair series Tráma Teaghlaigh, which hits the small screen on Wednesday the 31st of May at 9:30. So thank you guys so much for chatting with us.
No problem.
Thanks for having us.
It's just a really beautiful show, so poignant. You just did an amazing job.
Yes, thanks very much. And thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
I want to just say, just the stuff that you guys are covering in this, I think it's stuff that we as a nation, you can see that whole generation and how impacted they are, the relationship they have with pain. And I think this got to the crux of the historical aspects of it, but really the heart and how it impacted people moving forward. And I think that's what's really sort of beautiful and unique.
I mean, when we were starting on this process, myself and Fiona really wanted, a lot of times history, I don't know if you notice this, but a lot of times history programs can tend to be a little bit over academic-y, a little bit dominated by facts and figures, and these are important, don't get me wrong, big events, but we wanted to come at it with a slightly different angle, and T.G. Ceathair were very keen that we came at it with a different angle. And Fiona had hit upon the idea of looking at, because we started with a series of interviews that had been carried out in 2012 with children of some of the people involved in the Civil War, and that was our kind of base of it. And 1916, actually, you're right. Yeah, carried out with children involved in 1916, and the interviews have gone into other parts of their lives during the Revolutionary and Civil War period. So Fiona, we were trying to figure out what's this story, and I think Fiona hit upon the idea of this trauma because it was evident from these interviews that there was legacy issues going through then into that next generation, and that's kind of how the story kind of evolved. And then of course Fiona then took that and let Fiona talk a bit about that process of developing it and making it work and kind of getting it over the line with the broadcaster.
So would you, Fiona, have been involved with putting together the pitch and then structuring it with them? Is it a negotiation or is it a call-out process? Tell me a little bit more about it.
So it was part of the T.G. Ceathair BAI call-out process for 2021. And it was basically Brino Timon came to us. He had started to make a documentary called Páistín Rave Load, which is Children of the Revolution. And he had to stop due to family circumstances. So he really wanted to finish it. So he came to us with all of these interviews that he had shot, and we had a look at it, and I met Brian for a chat, and I was trying to figure out the best way of using these going forward because they were essentially meant for the centenary of 1916. And obviously we couldn't make a documentary about that because that's already been done. So I just had a conversation with him, and it was very obvious as well that you've got like these first-hand accounts. And at the same time, I was watching Transparent, which is a dark comedy series, but it also tells the story of intergenerational trauma from the Holocaust. And that's, I thought, well, nobody's really ever really explored that from the Irish point of view, from the point of view of the Civil War. So that's basically where we came up with the idea. And so we pitched it into T.G. Ceathair, and Maureen Gunnan, who's our commissioning editor, she really liked the idea. We weren't successful the first time, but she encouraged us to kind of look at the structure and the format of the program. So we repitched it for the next round, and then we were successful. So T.G. Ceathair put us forward for that BAI round of funding. But basically, Keith's been very modest there. Keith really kind of, but his strength is documentaries. This is the first time really that I've produced documentaries, and he really just knocked everything into shape in terms of that pitch.
But you really start with a baptism of fire. The scope of it is enormous.
Yeah, that's probably naivety. It's a great idea. Let's do it. But it's been a real privilege to work on it as well. So the heart that you're talking about, it was, I think originally when we had in the original script we had thought about doing reconstruction, and then in the first lot of interviews with the families, I just kind of felt, and Keith actually said it to me before I could say it to him, but we felt that there was kind of like this authenticity to their stories and this emotion to how they tell their stories, and the truth in that is like it's completely different from watching or listening to an expert. And it felt that reconstruction would have been sort of like lying. You know, there would have been something really inauthentic about using reconstruction. So Keith sort of kind of came to me and he said, "Oh, I don't think I want to do that anymore." And I'm so glad that you said that, and we explained it to Maura, and she was completely on board as well. So yeah.
I was just going to say it's really important when you've got a fantastic commission editor like Maura backing you in your corner, kind of and supporting you. And I think that's something that sometimes is underappreciated, having a really strong commissioning editor behind you and backing the project. And you know, from that, you know, she's back. You know, she was worried about whether we'd have enough coverage by choosing not to do drama recon. But we found some fantastic the family archives, the family's own collection of imagery is just so startling and so beautiful that we felt it wouldn't do justice to the families by trying to recreate moments in their lives. And it's also there's lovely poignant quiet moments where we see the family, you know, a third generation family member with somewhere that is associated with their parent story. Do you know what I mean? And I think that really, the kind of, you don't need drama recount for that, because the human emotions in what they're experiencing when they're there. So yeah, it became very clear to me during that first day or two of interviews that I didn't think recon was the right way forward. Actually, after we did the first family interview, I was like, right, now we can't with Audrey Dalton. It was kind of Audrey. We interviewed Audrey first, whose father Emmett Dalton was beside Michael Collins when he was shot, and it was after that I was kind of him and thinking about it, but we'd kind of gone down that road, and it was only a little bit later I said, no, we can't do drama recon. It won't work for this story.
As a viewer, one of the most poignant moments is you can see when they're telling their parents' story, they're starting to understand a little bit, or they empathize more now, maybe than when they were younger. Like there's a processing of the trauma. And like, I don't know if it's just something projected as a viewer or something you captured, or the way that they're telling the story, that the emotion is so raw in so many of those interviews. But you can just see like they're giving those stories, and it's they're really connecting to the stories of their parents, because I think, and that's one of the things of the intergenerational trauma fallout, where, you know, as you grow older, you understand a little bit more about what what the other generation had to go through. And, you know, maybe things at the time where you had a very fixed view as a child, you're like, actually, it's so much more complex. And I think that's beautifully captured, and so subtly captured through the way that you capture these episodes. And Fiona, you talked a little bit about the structure and about going back to retweak the structure. I'm very interested to how you guys decided on the chapters almost as they're presented. Like, how did you guys pull that together and decide these are the ones we're going to focus on? Because I presume you had a lot.
That was Keith again. It was Keith, and we brought, it was Louise as well. Some great researchers. Yeah. And
Louise Schreck did a great research.
Yeah.
No, it was finding, we had a whiteboard up in the office with names of family stories, and, you know, that we want and which ones would work well. And we know there was a couple of stories we actually went down the avenue of exploring and decided not to go with in the end, even though they were very, very valid and strong stories. I mean, it became clear to me that episode 2 should purely be about the women's experience of the Civil War, because it was really, really obvious that they'd been written. Women's experience of the Revolutionary period. Full stop. It was really clearly that they'd kind of been written out of it, and the ones who had been kind of talked about were always the widows of the martyrs, rather than the women who were actually in the GPO, or later, you know, smuggling guns during the War of Independence, or later spying on the Free State forces for coming upon, who were almost, you know, 90% went anti-treaty, because I think they saw themselves how the treaty could actually, and this isn't about whether the treaty was right or wrong, but they saw how the treaty could, in effect, have rolled back the freedoms that were, and did roll back freedoms that were granted to them through the 1916 proclamation.
Yeah, that's one of the kind of fascinating things for me that I've just realized is that in less than 10 years, all of these rights and things that had been fought for in 1916 were just thrown away and they've just disappeared. And then not only were they taken from them, but the women who had fought so hard for them were written out of Irish history as well. And it's it's mind-boggling. Yeah.
And definitely about that control over women and how systemically it's there, and how, you know, it's all hands on deck and we need everybody and we really appreciate your service until, you know, the war is over, and then we go back to business as usual, and then you go back in your box, you know. And then, like, I mean, that has happened with, you know, World War II, all those women making ammunitions in the factories, and then there's, you know, kind of sold the modern dream of like a modernized householdhood, and that's where you're supposed to go back to, and it's just systemic.
Yeah, I mean that Mary talks about that brilliantly. Mary McAuliffe is a brilliant academic, and we're checking out her work. And she talks about that the cause of freedom was wrapped up with the women's. Countess Markovitz talks about the three great causes, which is the cause of the worker, the cause of the woman, and the cause of Irish freedom. And the worker and the woman were quickly dropped by the Yeats, as Yeats described it, middle class Ireland. You know, fumbling with the greasy penny in the till.
Yeah. There's in episode 1, there's a photograph of the first Dáil, and there's, I think, 4 women in it. And then a few years later, there's a photograph of the Dáil, and there's only 1 woman in it. And then a few years after that, there's no women in it until the 50s.
Yeah. That's Countess Markovitz in that photo, and she dies at 27, and then there's no one in when she dies at 27. You know, and it's shocking. It is absolutely shocking. And it was funny, I was at a funeral of a woman who was a barrister, and in 71 she got married and had to give up. So it isn't that long ago that you had to give up your job when you got married. The marriage bar was still in place. So it just shows you, for 50, 60 years of the Irish state, the kind of the betrayal continued, you know?
From home rule to Rome rule. We know it well. But you were saying as well that the stories that you picked, and you couldn't always go with all of them. I'm curious as well. I know it's so long ago that the key players have passed on, but was there any conflicts there? You know, like, I mean, it's such a fraught history, and you're telling sides. Like, was there any difficulty that you guys sort of came across legally or just ethically in presenting these stories?
I mean, there's maybe 1 or 2 stories that we had to drop, or contributors that we had to drop, because they just didn't want to take part and they didn't want that story told or revisited. But for the rest, I think we were always really conscious of how we approached it as well. And we're always, as such, being transparent was incredibly important to us. And bringing the families along with us is also important to us as well. So, no, because I think that anyone who wasn't comfortable being part of it, that their story just wasn't told. That's probably the right answer to that, isn't it, Keith? Really? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because it's just interesting, because again, like, it's so, and you guys get such beautiful interviews from like the kids, from everyone involved. I'm just, how do you build that rapport? Because I do, like, a generation as well, you're kind of told not to talk about your feelings. Would this be something you'd have to spend a lot of time with them? Were they kind of eager to open up and have the stories, you know, be documented, or did you find you had to kind of dig?
No, they wanted to tell the stories, I think.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I think, like, they were just bursting to tell the stories too, which is brilliant that we can give them that platform as well. And also, Keith knows this history inside out. So, like, he's really great at developing that rapport as well.
Yeah, and it was a case as well. I think, you know, we did talk to everyone before we filmed it. I spent a good bit of time. Louise, the researcher, firstly spoke to them, and then we would do a second call, Zoom call, with myself and Louise, with the person, and talk to them. So we kind of knew what they were going to talk about before we sat down on camera. And we then, beforehand, we kind of went through what kind of questions we'd be asking, and we reassured them. And we made because it's a very intimidating thing to have a camera shoved in your face. So we
Mm.
made sure we tried to make it as painless as possible. Some people took to it like completely natural. I mean, Aidan Larkin probably missed his calling as an actor, to be totally honest with you, because he's just a natural in front of the camera, and visually he's a very striking individual himself. He looks great on camera. And so some of them came naturally. Some of them found it a little bit harder to get into the flow of the interview. But once it happened, once they were there, it kind of went organically, and I don't like overanalyzing, so I kind of let the questions flow a little bit and see where the answers take us, rather than trying to be very specific about I want this and I want that. Because I that's just my interviewing style. It's just the way I've developed over the years. But everyone has their own different way of how they want to do it. But it seemed to work well for this project.
And there's again, it's so structured, and you kind of cover such a great scope of things. Was you said you dropped things maybe because they weren't panning out, but were there any darlings that you had to cut for time or because they didn't fit in thematically?
Yeah, the one I'm cutting at the moment, I'm gutted about. Went to Israel and filmed with Daniel Briscoe.
No.
Yeah, yeah. No, we're keeping it in. Don't worry, we're not cutting that.
You,
But there's a
yeah.
great story that came out when we were filming in Israel, and we just don't have time to fit it into the story because his story, this Daniel Briscoe's grandfather, Robert Briscoe, was a fascinating man. I mean, there's a documentary in him on his own, and it was a case with him. It's like, what story? What there's so much going on there, including his work trying to rescue people smuggle people out of Germany during the Holocaust, to his role in stopping a civil war in Israel. And it kind of was a case of what can we leave? And never mind his own backstory as a refugee, as the child of a refugee, escaping pogroms in Russia in the late 19th century, settling in Dublin. The father building a family, living on the Keys, not far from where we're editing right now, to going into politics, being the only Jewish person in the Dáil for a long time, and being the only Jewish person involved in politics, and so trying to find some of his story in is really hard. We have the same issue with the story of Kathleen Brown, who we feature in episode 2, because Kathleen Brown in the 30s is really involved in trying to stop the Constitution, trying to get rid of um, the parts of the Constitution that are restricting women's rights. And again, we just couldn't fit that in. We allude to it, but we couldn't go into her role in that. I mean, she also was a blue shirt, which we did and slightly fascist, which we also didn't want to go into. But there's bits. I mean, again, it's something we couldn't get it fit in, because that I thought was quite interesting as well. Her move from being quite left wing politically in the 1916 to 22 period to moving to the right, which I know happens as you get older. So there's stuff like that that we couldn't fit in because we just didn't have time in each episode.
God, and there's such a wealth there. So you have a feature coming out yourself, Keith.
Yeah.
So there's plenty to mine in here. I would watch a series. If you're talking about dramatizing sections, are you tempted at all to
I'd love to
steal
do the
some?
Ryan. I'd love to do the Ryan's daughters as a drama. I think it's just they fascinate me completely. The Ryan family we feature in episode 2. They fascinate me as a family. They're like this kind of Irish farming stock that become integral to the revolutionary period and have been largely
Wexford farming stock.
Wexford farming stock as well. I got to be yes, sorry, Fiona, crikey, Wexford farming stock that have been written out of the story completely as well to some extent. And I'm also very fascinated. My feature is about an Irish family in Britain. I have a fascination with the Irish in Britain because they're the forgotten about Irish immigrants. We go on about our Irish Americans and Joe Biden comes home, you know what I mean? But people forget Tony Blair's mother was Irish, and there's a huge, we kind of ignore our Irish immigrants. So I have a bit of a fascination with it, which is why the feature which Fiona exec produced and really was key in our editing process to getting the story the way we wanted it. She undersells herself a little bit on the feature. She was a really vital part that exec producer as an exec producer on it. But I really wanted to focus on this Irish family. That wasn't your typical Irish British family, but I thought it interested me, and it's something I'd love to mine into and explore more. And there's huge numbers of Irish who left Ireland after the revolutionary period, anti-treaty primarily, but there was a few pro-treaty who didn't fit in, and I think that story needs to be mined as well. So you see a trend there emerging,
Yeah, like I see a Netflix special emerging, I think.
I wish.
Exactly.
I'd love to do more on the Robert Briscoe story. I think that would be amazing as well. Just the more I
Yeah.
talk about that, I don't know.
Plenty of scope for CoPro, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
International.
yeah. I mean, German, Israeli, Irish, UK. There's an American angle to it as well. I mean, I haven't even talked about his American side to his story. I mean, he's just an amazing character.
JFK references him in one of his election speeches. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, he's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. An
So
amazing character.
I look forward to catching that. But that's a very exciting thing. So there was you guys have a lot of stock footage, you have a lot of coverage, you have a lot of like beautiful caught locations. And you went to Israel. How do you manage a budget and to get all the stories told so visually and so wonderfully on top of all this? I think that's probably Fiona.
Well, I think one of the things was the decision not to have reconstruction gave us um more budget to use towards archive footage and also gave us additional shoot days. And we had Eleanor Bowman was shooting for us, and like she's amazing. She did such an amazing job on this, and that's why it looks so cinematic. It's Eleanor brought that with her as well. And then it also gave us the opportunity to keep an archive researcher on for longer. So we had a lot more time to research and really do a really good hard long look for a new and interesting archive that's not been seen before. And then also having access to the family archive was really important as well. So and Bree Drowdy then is editing it, and they both like both Eleanor and Bree to really elevated the whole thing, I think. Would you agree, Keith?
I totally agree, but I want to shout out for Emily Goodson as well, our
Oh
archive
yes, sorry,
researcher,
I
because
Woohoo!
she's found incredible archive.
yeah.
Like has been amazing. She's done a really incredible job on her first time, kind of being an archive researcher as well. And she's just found it incredible. And there was a wealth of stuff she dug out of the IFI, the Irish Film Archive. People give their home movie footage to the IFI, and it's some beautiful stuff. And we managed to find stuff that was relevant to our story. And then we were really fortunate that Lisa Mulcahy,
Mm.
the director, had actually done a documentary at the start of her career about her grandfather, and she was able to access some of that family footage for us and give it to us for the use of the production as well. So yeah, we were very very fortunate in our and actually interesting enough, the Larkin family were avid home Super 8 cinema makers. So they had a lovely, they filmed everything. So they had, we were very lucky in that respect that our members of different families had kept huge amounts of their own family archive and their family history. And I hope that when they're looking where to place that, they think about the IFI as a home for it, because it's a really it's a brilliant resource we have. I mean, I can't praise them enough. The IFI, they're under resourced, but they do a remarkable job.
Yeah, they've been super helpful on this as well. Like they've been amazing. And then also Cathal Waters shot the original interviews in 2011 and 2012. So what Breen and Cathal shot was it was an amazing leaping off point to have as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think we with some brilliant crew on this. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, I saw there was, you captured some interviews that you wouldn't have been able to have captured today, which was lovely to look back on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think you do a really wonderful job in sort of, I also think that's probably why this is the only time this could have been made. Like if you'd left it another 5 years, or if it hadn't gone through, like a lot of very important voices might have been lost.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think we're at a fortunate stage where there was still some of the children and the grandchildren were around alive and able to talk about it. And then we and Breen had very fortunately captured some of the children that are no longer with us on camera towards the end of their life at the right time, because they would have been lost, and their voices disappeared as well. So yeah, we were very very fortunate in that respect. You're right. I think 5 years later, I don't think this could have been made. I mean, it ties nicely with the anniversary as well of the end of the Civil War, of course, which helps.
And it's again, the pacing, I think, is something that you guys capture so beautifully. Just tell me a little bit about the post process, because there's a lot of um spinning plates, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of kind of chapters to get through. How did that work? How did the workflow of that work even?
Well, I start every project with a kind of story plan for each doc, and then I make a script, a shooting script in effect, obviously. That's my starting point. So when I went in, I did a paper edit on every episode. So before Breach started, I had a paper edit done to and make sure we had all the coverage we needed, the stories were working, and then Breed would take that paper edit, we'd pull in the interviews. It was always running over, and we'd cut it down. And in that stage, we were able to. At that point, myself and Breed, right, is this story working? Should we move that over to there? Is that story getting that? Are we do? Can we fit this bit of the story in? Which was the biggest. We were, it's like cutting those moments, these brilliant stories out because we just don't have time to tell them was one of the hardest process. And then we kind of sit back and look and think, okay, what is the flow before we even start picturing up and musicking? Is that flow working? Are we getting those peaks and troughs that for the audience that because it could be unremittingly grim. You need moments of lightness. You know what I mean? Even in that Briscoe story, there's a great, very funny story about people not understanding that he's Jewish. Do you know what I mean? They're like, when he's there and founding a Fianna Fáil, and there's a guy going, and your man's going like, they're going, but what? Why did you not go to mass? And he's like, I'm Jewish, I don't go to mass. You know what I mean? And it's that kind of thing, So you need those moments of lightness as well. And so it's that we myself and Breed will sit back and make sure that kind of those ebbs and flows isn't all dark, dark, dark. There's moments where you're cheering on our characters. Are you amazed at their ability to forgive? And I think the Stephen Fuller case is a brilliant case of that, as is the O'Higgins. I mean, is Una Higgins O'Malley's stories fascinating. I mean, there's two really interesting stories of severe trauma within their families, both yet managed to find Stephen Fuller as a victim of state-sponsored, well, not terrorism, but what would you call it, a extrajudicial killing, attempted extrajudicial killing, and a war crime, is able to forgive the people and work with the people who may have taken part of that. And then Una Higgins O'Malley is able to forgive the people who murdered her father uh, in the name of the Republic. And not only that, then begin and try and use her loss to heal rifts in the conflict in Northern Ireland, which is an extension in itself of the Civil War. Do you know what I mean?
Una O'Higgins O'Malley, her story goes back to her grandmother, who that it goes back that far in the family that she probably knew who had assassinated her husband, but she never spoke out about it because she didn't want reprisals or retaliation. I think it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much tragedy in that family. For Kevin O'Higgins' father is murdered during the Civil War. Kevin O'Higgins is murdered in 1927 when the war is long since over, but obviously the bitterness still remains, and yet to be able to forgive twice is it's so remarkable. She lost her husband, and it was led by Mrs. O'Higgins, Kevin's mother, who that idea of forgiveness was led by Una's grandmother. It's carried on by Una's mother, so that's Kevin O'Higgins' wife, and then Una carried it on into her life and lived by that idea of forgiveness. And she experienced some very traumatic moments herself on that journey. She discovered that one of O'Higgins's killer danced on his grave. So, and that must have been very traumatic for her. You know what I mean? But at the end, she was able to put that behind her.
And but it's so close to home for everybody. Do you know, like Ireland is a very, very small place, and some of these towns are, well, that's why I think there was one anecdote about one of the killers in an assassination, kind of revealing afterwards what the last words were, and it was very poignant. Like, it was a very beautiful scene for forgiveness that we want to move forward. And I think in some ways, even though some of the stories are like grim, like so grim, like I'm still sort of haunted by about where people were describing the trees afterwards, and the substance left on the trees. Like, I still was thinking about that days afterwards. But then I think there's a real humanity and and a sort of healing process that is in process as well. From like that is, and a hopefulness in the tone of that. I just wonder, was that like something that was conscious, that you were aiming towards?
I think when we were doing the research process, myself and Louise were thinking particularly episode 1, we needed to get that sense of reprisal and reconciliation. Reconciliation was always that, even though the title might be called Reprisal, it was really Reprisal Reconciliation, and it was about getting on and understanding that power of forgiveness was so so important. And then episode 2, we look at the power of healing within. We look at one family split by the Civil War, which was such a common thing, and we look at the power of healing and the power of being able to move beyond your traumas. And in episode 3, which looks at disillusionment and people who had, there's a great story, Moira McSweeney Brewer, who's lost her father, was Terence McSweeney. Her mother basically pretty much abandoned her in Germany, and when she returned to Ireland, there was a court case over her, and she chose to stay with her aunt, and her mother refused to speak to her ever again. And yet, even in that, there was with her husband Rory Brewer, who was Cathal Brewer's son. There was this sense of working for something better. Cathal Brewer had joined the IRA. Moira McSweeney Brewer was well aware of her background as a martyr and could have used that for Republicans, but she didn't want anything to do with it. She wanted to, they became pillars of the state in effect, but also pillars of that idea of moving beyond that. And there's too much bitterness, and even today there's still this legacy of the Civil War that some people carry on, and it does nothing but spreads hate. And I love the fact that they were able to move beyond. There's these really great stories of redemption, not redemption, that's the wrong term to use. Really great stories of being able to take that trauma and turn it into something positive, whether it was, Briscoe using his experience as a gun runner to save lives. Keela composed the music. They did an incredible job. So that it's kind of very haunting. We wanted something that wasn't your typical history television music, which is often very bombastic. And Keela created this beautiful haunting pieces that kind of, I think, really tie the stories together in all 3 episodes. And the other key thing is Elements, who are our post-production house, have done a really fantastic job. There's a lot of archive to ingest. There's a lot of material to ingest. They've just been brilliant at taking everything and making it work for us and making the workflow work.
And it's very, like, again, the pacing is great. It's very exciting to watch. And actually, Fiona, I want to talk to you a little bit about you have a lot of you mentioned Breed, Emily, Lisa. You've strong women behind the camera. You focus a lot on strong women in the narrative. I'm just curious, is that are you, Keith, a natural feminist, or was there women at play behind the scenes as well, engineering that?
I think when we were putting the crew together and when we were researching the stories, that was definitely at the back of our mind, to make sure that we had that we told women's stories and that we had women on the crew as well. And I think that's how both of us would approach any project, just make sure that there's kind of equal representation in front of and behind the camera, because I think you need to do that in order to tell good stories.
Yeah, definitely. It's very strong throughout it, that strong female narrative. Like episode 2 especially, I think, does a really nice job. But even your experts,
Yeah.
you've got like strong authoritative voices of women who are experts on the field, telling these very human stories with a lot of empathy as well, which was lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've worked with Breed before. Never worked with Elder before, but Fiona sang her praises, and my brother Colin's a location manager, and worked with her on Lisa Mulcahy's first feature film. So I knew her by reputation, and I was really excited about getting an opportunity to work with her. Her stuff is visually very interesting and very stunning, and it really elevates the film a lot. And then the other thing, I mean, Breed and myself have a good working relationship. We'd worked before, so I kind of knew that in the edit, it's kind of useful to have someone who knows your shorthand as well. I don't know. I mean, with regards our contributors, we looked for the best people we possibly could, and I think there's a part of that Irish academic tradition that has largely overlooked women academics and their work they're carrying out. And so I thought it was really important that both myself and Fiona and Louise, who was researching us, our researcher with us at the start of the project, felt it was really important that we balance on screen as much as possible, but also brought some of this research that probably hasn't been brought to light as well.
There's such a big scope for this, but just say money wasn't an issue or you got greenlit for more episodes. Is there more you would have liked to have covered? Is there like an avenue you would have gone down had you been able to?
We always want an extra episode. There's so many stories I'd love that we couldn't tell that I'd love to have been able to tell. If one more episode, I think would have been brilliant to maybe explore some of the kind of lesser told tales of the Civil War as well. But we're very grateful to be able to make this and have a 3-part series. And for TG Carr to have backed us and Maura to have backed it so much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Keith. I think it was great to have this opportunity, and I'm super proud to have been part of telling those stories as well. I think it's been a kind of privilege.
Looking back now on your first documentary project, which is enormous, how do you feel now?
Tired.
Was there anything that you'd go back and go, oh my God?
There's definitely, I knew forward what to expect and how I would change the workflow a bit more. But I've learned a huge amount on it. But that would be the only thing I would change, is to how I would tweak the workflow. But nothing else. I think we had an amazing crew.
And as a sort of production point of view, what would you see as being the number one differences and adjustments going from one format to another?
I think timing on getting scripts transcribed, I think that was a huge thing that I kind of underestimated. And I'm used to more working on scripted content, so I work on it the other way around. So that was a learning thing for me.
Yeah, I think when you're because having worked on both, I think the key that some people don't really struggle. It can be, people don't realize how hard it can be in documentary making, because the story can evolve in a way you never expect, and you can discover things that you've never planned for, but you kind of have to adjust for and work towards and change as you're going along. And I think that could be the biggest challenge sometimes, is that sense of, when you got a script, you kind of know where A to B is going to be. You know how to get from A to B, but with documentaries, sometimes you find yourself at C instead.
And is there anything now, what would be a natural progression from this for you? Would it be a part 2 for the series and go back to the era? Is there another area that you'd like to cover? Would it be to dramatize it? What would be your next, like, if you were to get exactly what you put your hat in the ring for?
I think I'd love to make the documentary about Robert Briscoe. I think that's an amazing co-production, and I think that it's such a brilliant story. And yeah, and maybe tell a bit more about women's history in Ireland as well. I think there's other angles on that I'd love to explore.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think because that's one of the things that it goes really into, like the kind of personalities behind, and it really is enjoyable to kind of immerse yourself as a viewer in that. But I think, again, while always coming back to the humanity and the people behind it, and it's not like a litany of descriptions of events. It's really the impact, which is done so beautifully. Keith?
Yeah, I'd love to do something a bit. I agree with Robert Briscoe. It's a great untold story, Irish story. I'd love to do a project, a documentary project on exploring the social history of Ireland, but through ordinary people, people's experiences and lives, like we did with Tráma, in a way. I love those kind of brilliant individual stories that can tell us the bigger story. And on the drama front, I'm really keen to do something about the Irish of Britain. I really want to do a story about the Irish of Britain.
Brilliant. So funders, take heed. That I would definitely watch. Having seen the first 2 episodes, and which are on air on Wednesday the 31st
at 9:30 on TG
on
Cahir.
TG Cahir, so people can watch the first one.
Mhm.
Yeah. So after watching them, I would definitely sign up to both of those and add to them to my watch list. So thank you so much for chatting with us. That was absolutely brilliant and well done. I'm sure you'll have a lot to celebrate once they're up online.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gemma.